All right, I think we're going to get started. I'm Kathy Olson. I'm the Dean of the Faculty and Professor of Psychology here at Reed. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the academic program. I'm going to talk through kind of just four main points about the academic program and really hope to have a lot of this kind of question and answer. I came into this role as Dean of Faculty in July of 2020. So I've been a psychology professor for 25 years at Reed and then moved over to this role. So this is my first time getting to have these sessions in person. Last year we did them all online. So thank you for coming. It's really great to have you all coming out for Parents Weekend. I guess also just more broadly, thank you for entrusting your children to us. So we're really excited to have your kids as part of this education. I'm obviously biased, but I think we've really got one of the best undergraduate educations out there, and really want to tell you a little bit about that and answer questions that you have. And again, I'm kind of talking some general things about the program, but I also, judging from the last session we had, I know also a lot of you are here really kind of trying to think about how do you support your children in the academic program. So I'll kind of give you some knowledge about the academic program, but really I'm here to answer whatever kinds of questions that can help you support your kids to be able to do well at Reed. So, okay. So I want to say a few things kind of like liberal arts education. I mean, our key goals, we're trying to help students develop critical thinking, developing all the skills required for critical examination. So we want them to come out of Reed good writers, good at oral processing, at reading, at researching. They're going to, in their final year, everybody's going to do a senior thesis. So they're going to do a year-long sustained project from the beginning to the end where they look at something, their own research question, their own intellectual passion. So one, to be able to have a time across their time at Reed to set everybody up to be able to do that. I'll talk a little bit, we always think of faculty as teacher scholars. So they're folks that are doing research and are scholars in their fields, but they're also teaching and bringing that scholarship into the classroom. Your kids are student scholars, so they're learning how to be scholars and all of the pieces that that involves in this education. Second thing that I'll also kind of highlight throughout, when we do this, we're doing this together. So students are going to be developing these independent skills, but it's going to be in an environment where they're collaborating with other people, that's collaborating with other students, with faculty, with staff. You all are probably going to sessions today where you're learning about student life and other things that are happening at Reed. So we've got a whole system where your children are being supported to be able to do this work. Certainly things about mental health or about tutoring, about peer tutoring, or working with other kinds of things to support them in their academic program. The other thing you kind of think about doing this together, a lot of what we do is in groups. So we certainly can talk about the conference method. So students are coming in, Humanities 110, they're learning kind of in this group setting, how do we interrogate and talk about intellectual questions in a way that as a group, we're pulling out the key things and we're building on each other and we're doing that together. So we'll kind of think about that throughout as well. I'm going to focus on kind of four things in the academic program. This is my single slide. I don't want to give you a big talk, so I just have four things I'm going to highlight a little bit about what I think are distinctive and important about our academic program. We've got high quality teaching. So the idea is, so faculty at Reed, when they're evaluated on advancement and tenure, the number one thing that they're evaluated on is teaching. So we've got teaching, we've got scholarship, so they need to be doing real research and being teacher scholars. But we want to have high quality teaching, so we'll talk a little bit about the teaching at Reed. We've got a curriculum that has high standards and scaffolded learning. So we'll expect a lot from your kids. So we want them to really come out of this challenged and developing new ideas, so knowledge and skills, but it's scaffolded. So the idea is when they come in as first-year students, they don't know how to do all of these things yet. They're going to learn, they're going to improve their writing throughout the first year. They're going to improve their critical thinking. They're going to, again, some of them may have had conference discussions in high school. Many of them really went to high schools where they had a lot of lecture, or frankly, this last year they may have been sitting at home in their room, Zooming, and really not having had that kind of group interaction. And so teaching us how do we together come up with academic knowledge and build on that. So we're going to sort of scaffold all of that so that they're developing those skills so that by their senior year, they'll be able to do this kind of year-long research project. Which is the third thing, the independent student research. So I'll talk a little bit about opportunities along the way that they'll be doing research in courses. Many students do research or independent projects over the summer. So we can think about how all of that across the academic time. And then finally, kind of excellent faculty who are doing things, doing research, and excellent faculty in the sense that we don't have adjunct professors. We have our professors are full-time professors, that this is what they're doing teaching and research, and we'll think about that a little bit. So, high quality teaching, curriculum with high standards and scaffolded learning, independent student research, and excellent faculty. So I'll say a little bit about each of those, and then I'll open it up majority of time for questions. Okay, let me turn off that slide. The other thing is when there's questions, what we'll have people do is folks can kind of raise a hand. We have a couple people that will come by and they'll bring a mic to you. So we want to be able to hear the questions so everybody in the room. The other thing is the last session we didn't do that, and we couldn't always, we recorded it so other people would hear later and people couldn't hear the questions. So I want to be able to, when you do that, just raise your hand, somebody will come by with a mic. We've got a couple at the top. Okay, so high quality teaching. So at Reed, we teach well. Classes are intense, they're active learning, students have close relationships with their faculty members. Our emphasis is on having an excellent classroom experience. As I noted, faculty are teacher scholars and they're bringing their expertise in the classes that they're developing. So even in the introductory courses, they're going to be bringing in that they study things about climate change, so they're going to be able to bring that into the introductory courses. And then as students go along, they'll have more kind of in-depth courses where they're going into those more specific areas. In this high-quality teaching, your students are going to be encouraged to really actively question things. So they hear a lecture or they learn about something. And the thing that struck me, I remember when I first came to Reed in '95, teaching for the first time, is I would say something in class, and they would write it down or whatever, but then they would say, but what about this and what about that? And the students are really going to be encouraged to question what they're learning, actively coming at that. The other thing with this high quality teaching, we're really going to want students to take on challenging and sensitive questions. So even in the introductory humanities course, they're learning, how do we talk about race? What are we learning about this? How do we talk about these topics that frankly are really hard to talk about in ways that are meaningful and in-depth, and really trying to do that with this teaching. We've got a low faculty to student ratio, so there's about 9 students per 1 faculty member, because it's really important that we're in this kind of high-touch, connected environment in the work that we're doing. I was talking to somebody earlier, their child was a sophomore and they were here last year, and certainly last year we did a bit of that, and really wanting to, we were here, we were on campus, there were students living in the dorms, but really this year almost all classes are in person, and really wanting to have that level of connection with faculty and students in the classroom. So classes are small. First year class team 110, they're all capped at 17. So students generally have kind of 15 to 17 students in their introductory course. The vast amount of our courses, we're going to try to keep them pretty small. Some of your children probably have introductory science courses. Those tend to have like a big lecture, but then they'll have a smaller lab section or a conference session. So really trying to make sure that in the various courses, there's some parts that are pretty small, so they can really have that kind of in-depth interaction with other students and with faculty. Thesis obviously is kind of small. Generally, students are collaborating with 1 faculty member, depending on the discipline. So again, my area is psychology. I would have a lab meeting with my 5 thesis students, but then I would also meet with them each individually each week, so you have those kind of small interactions where you really get to know each other and you know the strengths and weaknesses of someone's work and how to kind of help them improve that work. The other thing I want to note kind of about the high quality teaching, faculty really interact with broader support staff, academic support, to try to enhance that teaching. So if as a faculty member I'm teaching a class and I notice that a student isn't really coming to class, or there's something that's going on, I'll reach out to the care team and say, I'll email the student, of course, as well, but I also can sort of, there's a broader system of folks that are going to really support that in terms of thinking about students' health, thinking about other kind of resources that students need. I was talking with the parent earlier, kind of thinking about how do you kind of help students structure kind of their academic work, and I may have a student who's not turning in papers, and so I connect them with academic support staff that can help them kind of create a calendar where they're kind of breaking their work into smaller pieces and so forth. So really trying to give them that academic structure with coaching and tutoring, could be mental health or physical health kind of things. So really a holistic way of looking at this academic support. The final thing, I guess, in terms of thinking about teaching, we talked about the classroom. A lot of academic stuff happens outside the classroom. So if you, maybe not a Saturday, but if you go over to if I walk over to Commons and get a bowl of soup or something like that, and I'll sort of hear people talking in the dining hall, and students are talking about ideas. I might be walking through the canyon, taking my dog for a walk. Again, if you haven't been to campus before, I would really encourage you to walk through the canyon. It's gorgeous. It seems like you all have great weather this weekend. So I would really get out and kind of look at kind of the beauty of the campus. But I'll be walking, through the canyon, and I'll hear students talking about, well, what do you think about, and they'll be, in Genesis, blah, blah, they'll be talking about something from Hume class, or what, you hear these academic conversations all over the place. And so a lot of learning happens in a variety of places around campus. So high quality teaching. Let's say a little bit about kind of curriculum. As you all know, you kind of have these bookends. You've got Hume 110, so all first year students take Hume 110, and then you've got senior thesis. All students do a senior thesis. And so it's kind of the defining features of kind of the beginning and the end of what we're doing at Reed. So our Hume 110 class, it's generally tenured long-term faculty that teach in that class. Again, we have a lot of resources in that class. We've got, again, I know you all have for first year students, there's a large incoming class. We've got 500 students coming in. So we have 31 Hume sections. So we wanted to make sure that there was 17 or fewer students in each of those sections. And so really wanting to have that first year experience with these small courses. Personally, I haven't taught, I'm not used to the microphone. I haven't taught in Hume 110. I teach in the psychology department. But as a psychology professor, I count on that class for students to really learn how to write better, to think better, to know how to participate in a conference. And so it teaches all of these skills in addition to the content of the things that they're writing about in that course. All students then have this capstone experience of the thesis. So it's not an honors thesis, it's a senior thesis. Every senior does that. And so what we're trying to do along the way is students come in, and again, we've been in a very particular situation. Myself, I have a couple children who are in college. They are not at Reed. They did not choose to go where their mom is a dean of faculty or whatever, which makes sense. Good, they go out in the world. But anyway, one just started as a first-year student somewhere else, and they're coming off the pandemic where they kind of had this really different experience, and then they're coming in and they're like, bam, things are really hard, and I didn't have to work hard last year. That was kind of a different experience. But we're going to really try to create that first-year experience where they're learning all of these things, and then across the years. So again, if they were a psychology major, so the department I know the most about, they would come in, they would be taking Hume 110s, they would be learning all of these kinds of things. They might be taking intro psychology, they might be taking biology or something, they might be taking foreign languages. But they're sort of learning these things, and across their time in psychology, they're going to learn, so my field is social psychology, they might learn about social psychology, they're going to I teach the stats class, they learn about statistics, they're going to learn all of those things so that by the time they get to their senior thesis, they'll have all of the skills, the knowledge to be able to do this project. But we've got various pieces in there. We have a junior qual that they take generally second semester junior year, which is kind of a qualifying exam. So basically it's kind of diagnosing, do you have the skills? Are you ready to start your thesis next year? So in psychology, what that is they read a journal article, so kind of what we do in psychology. They critique it, and they propose a follow-up study, because their thesis is going to be running a study. So they're kind of, do you have the skill to be able to think about what's the next step to run a study? And so kind of thinking about what are the things that we want students along the way to be able to have these skills across their time at Reed. We can think about different majors, and again, I certainly could ask questions or you could catch me afterwards. But the idea is that we've got kind of the right classes, the right content along the way for students to be able to be doing these various things. I focused on thesis, and I guess I just want to be clear. The thesis, many students aren't going to go on and decide to go to graduate school or write a thesis later. But that thesis, to me, it kind of holds our feet to the fire because we want students to be able to do all of these things by the end. And I was talking to somebody recently in Center for Life Beyond Read, and she was talking about the thesis. She thought of it almost like they have to be a project manager to be able to do their thesis for that year. Because it's not just that you're doing this academic project, you have to do all of the pieces of that and figure out how to kind of do them across the year. So again, in psychology, a field that I know, they have to do a literature review. They need to go and figure out what are they going to run in their study. They need to figure out the statistics. They need to collect data. They need to get IRB approval from the regulations to be able to ethically work with participants. They need to write their thesis. They have a oral with for faculty members who are asking them questions. So to do all of those pieces, they need to be able to break that down and do all of the pieces of all the pieces to be able to do that. And even if you were doing whatever fields you're in, it would have the various things that are involved in kind of coming up with that. So I think it's kind of helps us really think about what are the things that we're trying to have students develop in their time here. Obviously, all students, we've got HUME 110 that I talked about. There's distribution requirements. We have 3 broad group distribution requirements, basically kind of arts and literatures and humanities, social sciences, math, natural sciences, psychology. So we have 3. So they're going to have a broad understanding across various areas, and then they'll have the requirements of their major. I guess the kind of final thing I just wanted to say about this curriculum that I'm saying that has high standards, students work really hard. They really, we expect a lot from them. We want them to really thrive in this, and we're trying to set up a system that can help them do that, to be able to work hard and to get the feedback that they need and to be able to do this. In that, I think especially with the pandemic, faculty are working really hard, staff are working really hard. A lot of people are really working hard to try to make this really impressive academic experience for your kids. Third thing is kind of independent student research, and I've talked a little bit about that. That we want people to be able to do this by the end of their time at Reed. Along the way, students are going to be doing all kinds of experiences to help them develop this independence. We have all kinds of internships and research opportunities in the summer. I just got some recent data. About 135 students got funding this last summer to do research and independent kind of internships and other kinds of experiences. They might be working in a lab at some other college. They might be working in a lab at Reed. We have money that students can apply for that they could go work at a nonprofit who can't pay them, and Reed will pay them so that they have funding for the summer to be able to go work at a nonprofit. So we want students to have these experiences when they've got the 3 months in the summer to really develop things that they're passionate about, things that they want to go more in depth in. The other thing I guess I just wanted to note with kind of independent student research is to do this work, we've got faculty that they themselves are doing research. So again, as I noted, our number one thing here is high quality teaching. That's what we evaluate faculty on. But the second thing right behind that is that they're scholars, that they're doing real research. I pulled up again recently some numbers about research that we've had across biology and chemistry and psychology, what kind of grants we have. And over the past 5 years, we've got faculty brought in $13.5 million in grant money to be able to do research. So they're doing research that's furthering their own kind of research ideas. We had this new grant recently, Beckham grant with, again, this high impact microscope, and tons of students are going to be working in that lab. So we've got Kara Severity in biology and people in computer science and statistics. But all these students are going to be working there in the summer and learning all of these kind of really impactful research things. But we've got faculty who are excited about their research and engaging students in that work. The final thing I want to note, kind of, which that bleeds into it, is kind of thinking about excellent faculty. So kind of the things that they're doing. The things I wanted to note, the faculty that we have at Reed, almost all are full-time Everybody's on the same salary scale, so we've got faculty. We don't have adjuncts where we sort of pay somebody a little bit of money to come teach here. We pay people appropriate amount of money because we want people that are really committed, that this is what they're doing. This is their full-time job, that they are teaching students at Reed. Majority of them are tenure track or tenured. We do have a number of visitors who really are great and really enhance what we're doing. Maybe faculty are on sabbatical or some kind of leave, but we've got kind of a robust system for this. But this kind of high quality teaching is really fundamental to these excellent faculty. Wanted to end kind of just general conclusion. Our main focus here is on the education. It's kind of the North Star of what we're trying to do here. Any place has to make difficult decisions about how do you allocate resources and what do you want to do. And really thinking about how do we create this really high quality educational experience. And that's where we're putting the resources because that's what we value. Again, that could be creating the various things about that. That could be having the staff that can support that, but really thinking about what do we need to do to have this high quality educational experience. Because I'm confident in what we have to offer you. I think we have a strong mission. I think we're really trying to do this in a way that I think is meaningful and important. I guess I would kind of end by saying I'm also confident in your students. Again, as a parent, I know it's kind of challenging to kind of send your children out into the world and kind of entrust them to someone else to sort of help them thrive and teach them lots of things. But we accepted your children because we thought we had confidence in them. We thought they could come, they could thrive, that they could succeed here, that they could do well. And we will push them, we will challenge them, we will sort of push them out of their comfort zone of things that they've thought about before, and hopefully they'll develop all kinds of new knowledge and maybe change some ideas that they had because they're actually learning new things. But anyway, I guess my advice to you is to encourage your students to use the resources that we have. Again, we can talk about all kinds of things. I know we just came out with 8-week grades, for instance, kind of the students that were getting feedback about what's happening in classes. Some parents in the last session asked some about grades. But I would encourage your students to reach out to their faculty if they have questions about how they're doing. Again, my daughter is now a senior in college. She talked about office hours her first year. So she's at college and she said, my friends all say, office hours, isn't that for the students who are bad? And why would they go to office hours? And she said, my mom's a professor. And I told them, students go to office hours and that's where you get to have one-on-one and you get to ask all the questions that you want to ask. Like, the professors are sitting there waiting for you to come by and answer your questions. So I think really encouraging your kids to take advantage of the resources that we have, I think can be really helpful. And that may be something that's pretty different from what they did in high school. At least my experience is that often is. So anyway, we're going to open it up for any questions that you have at this point. And if you have a question, I think the plan is that you'll just raise your hand, and then we've got a couple folks in the back that will come by with a microphone so we can make sure. So we got it. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question about how students stay on track with the curriculum. Do they meet with an advisor every semester prior to registration to make sure that they're registering according to what they should be registering for in order to stay on track for their particular major?
Yes. So the question is about how do students kind of stay on track, like kind of navigating their major. Yeah, so students will have, and again, I know you have students at kind of all different levels, but certainly I'll kind of just say that first year students, for instance, this year had a kind of an advisor in the summer, and then they got kind of batoned over to their main advisor, or students that started in previous years, they kind of had this main advisor. So students always register for kind of both semesters for the next year. So again, incoming students, they're registered for both semesters, but then we always have a moment in the fall. So actually, I think November 15th, Solar, which is our online system, is going to open, and students can switch classes for the spring. To be able to do that, they have to contact their advisor and meet with them to get their PIN number that is actually going to allow them to do that. So we're always making sure that they're in touch with their advisor to do this information. So yeah, students should meet each semester kind of with their advisor, their academic advisor, to be working on what are the classes that they should be taking. Some students will just send an email saying, my classes are great, I don't need to change anything, and so they might not meet with their advisor this fall, because maybe what they set up already for the year is they're already set up. But students kind of each semester will need to meet with their advisor to kind of be able to do those classes. At the end of their sophomore year, students declare their major, so they fill out a form that has, have I done Hume 110, what am I doing with my group requirements, their major requirements. Some majors have divisional requirements, so if you're in history and social sciences, you need to take some in some other fields. So there's going to be a moment in the spring of their sophomore year that they kind of have that whole, if you go online on the registrar's website, there's all these, I forget what they call them, I think planners or something, but like if you're a psychology major, here's kind of a plan you might think about for your 4 years. I have a number of advisees that have studied abroad, so they actually have to come up with their 4-year plan because we don't want them to, actually I had a student who ended up with the pandemic, kind of got stuck somewhere, they were an international student initially and then they kind of went, but we kept them on course. I mean, they ended up remotely doing classes from someplace else one semester because they, just various kinds of quarantine and stuff. But yeah, they'd come up with a 4-year plan before they studied abroad so that we knew what they needed to do, and then they couldn't get one some class, so we figured out what was going on. But yeah, I think really working closely with their advisor. Some of your students may have an advisor that's not in the field that they want to ultimately end up in. I think the biggest major we have coming in is undecided. So students come in and we assign somebody to a major, to an advisor. And so your student might say, I was talking to a parent earlier and they said, my student now is thinking anthropology, but maybe their advisor is not in anthropology because they were undecided. So they could reach out to a anthropology professor, say, could you be my advisor? And then they would meet with them and sort of think about what that track is. So really kind of touching base every semester, I think, is the plan. All right, we've got.
Hi, thank you. So our student chose Read for all the things that you're talking about, and I think so far is feeling that. The one struggle, and I guess this is the question, the first question talked about staying on course with the curriculum, and that sort of predicates that they know what they want to study and they know their major. I think his struggle is balancing exploration, because he doesn't know what he wants to major in, with what feels like overwhelming requirements, and like that tension of, will he be able to do it all without extra time?
And I think we need a mic down here if you want to come. Yeah. So say again. So
it's balancing the tension of not knowing what you want to major in with the curriculum requirements and all the requirements, basically. And what's your advice for a student like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a really typical situation. I think many students are undecided about what they want to do, or I have students and they'll say, I might be a psychology major or I might be a theater major. And those requirements look really different. I mean, in all of them, they're going to take humanities, they're going to take some natural science, they're going to take some social science. I mean, there's some things that will be, what I tend to advise students, there's some majors, and again, if you went through kind of these planners I was talking about, there's some majors that are much more structured. So for instance, if you wanted to be a biochem major, for instance, you need to take this class and then you follow it up with this class, and there's things that you have to do first to be able to do later things. If you want to be a psychology major, there's intro psych, and then it opens up everything else. So there's some majors that are really open. There's maybe like one gateway class and then everything else. And then there's some majors that you need to take chemistry, and then you need to take organic chemistry, and and so what I tend to do when I advise students is I sort of say, like, again, you can decide, you want to explore, what are all the possible majors you might be thinking about doing? So let's kind of think about all of those kind of majors. Oh, you're thinking about, you might want to do this major. Okay, that one's got a lot where you've really, so let's make sure you're at least getting the kind of first class in that. You'll use it for your group requirement if you don't major in that, but you need to kind of set that up, because if you don't do that your first year, it's going to be really hard to go along. Other majors, I'll say, okay, well, you could wait till sophomore year to kind of explore that. But I think it is kind of juggling. In part when they're doing their kind of group requirements, those could be what becomes their major, or they could also be their group requirements. And so, group 2 is all the social sciences. So they say, oh, I could take an econ class, I could take an anthro class, I could take a history class, and they're kind of exploring those majors. And then, okay, I decided on history. Now econ's going to become my just part of my group requirements, and I'll kind of go with this. So I guess I would actually have, ask your child to kind of think about, like, they may not have, what are the constellation of things, but what are the kinds of things they might think about, and then they could play through all of the tracks for each of those. The other thing, I'll have students that will say, I want to do a interdisciplinary major with a bunch of things. And I'll say, oh, that sounds kind of challenging, but let's kind of think about what that looks like. And I'll say, well, let's map out all of those, and then what can you keep doing? At this point, you're going to have to make a choice, kind of helping them see what they could do to kind of explore that would count as stuff, and then they can kind of make that choice. So that's what I would have recommended. They kind of try to map out the various things, and their advisor can help them kind of with all of those paths. Yeah. And there are a couple hands down here, so yeah.
So let's imagine if a student is kind of deviating from their presumed success path, how do they know about this? What support net is available, and do we know about this at some point?
And what happens if they fail?
I say every parent's like, oh, I can relate to this. So the initial question was kind of, how do you know how your student's doing? And then what happens if there's problems in that path? Again, just maybe say a little bit about grades, and then I'll kind of come back to the specific things. So READ has a pretty kind of unique way we talk about grades. So every class, students are getting grades. So your professor is putting grades in a grade book. When you look at a transcript from READ, it has grades for all the classes, so they're getting grades. But yet the grades are not really emphasized in the class. So like when I teach statistics, for instance, I'll give people a score, but I don't sort of put A at the top of the paper or something. I give them some information. And for them, the hope is that they're getting feedback to know how they're doing, but there's not sort of this emphasis on what the grades are. And again, if your children's high schools were like my children's high schools, they probably could go online and get every grade for every assignment, and it's very specific. Very different from what we're doing at READ, where we're sort of saying, let's look at what you're learning and not really emphasize the grade in that. So then the question is, how do students know how well they're doing if we're not putting the grades in the front? What happens for faculty, we have a kind of at the 4-week mark, so the semester is like 12 to 13 weeks. At the 4-week mark, there's a moment where faculty have to kind of turn in what we call 4-week grades. These are progress grades. They're not going to become their grade or anything. And if the student's doing fine, they may do nothing at that point. So if, let's say I have a student, let's say my daughter were a junior and she had been struggling, and that she might get some 4-week things that just say things are going fine, she's coming to class, she's doing her work, or it might also say she's not coming to class, she's not doing her work. Like I might get there might be a 4-week moment where there's some information. As parents, you wouldn't likely get that. Your student would get that information. They would get an email that says you've got some 4-week comments. Go check on that. We actually just did 8-week grades and comments. So some of you, but your children may have said, I got an email and I went online and I checked on my comments and it said things were going fine, or it said you haven't been turning in your papers, or whatever. You get some kind of feedback on that. Basically, families kind of set, like as a parent, families sort of set up who has access to the information. So if I went on a student's, in IRIS is our kind of computer system, it might say parents have access to grades. It might say parents don't have access to grades. So you all make a decision, or your child makes a decision, or as a family makes a decision, depending on how it works, to sort of say, how does that work? But there's something that's been checked to like who has access to the grades in that. But I would, again, encourage you, and again, last session we talked with many parents who said, my children don't tell me anything about what's going on in terms of their grades or other things in their life at READ. But they just would have gotten information about, do they have any comments about their 8-week performance? And so they would have gotten an email, and here's some feedback. Let's say a student is taking intro biology, which is very common first-year student class. They take an intro biology, they haven't been turning in their lab reports. They would get a comment that says, you haven't been turning in your lab reports. Here's what you need to do to get back on track. It would encourage them to go talk to the lab instructor, to go talk to the faculty member. Maybe they're having time management issues. At the end of the semester, when the final grading happens, at that point, again, if things were going poorly, you all would find, if there was sort of they could be put on probation, they could be asked to take a semester off. Again, there's things that could happen, so there's things, there'd be constant, if a student was failing all of their classes for their first year, we would say, you need to kind of go take care of some stuff, rather than having your parents pay a lot of money and have you come here and that this isn't working out right now. Like, there's some things that need to be kind of taken care of in that sense. So you would get information kind of at that point. But again, I would encourage you to, like, if there's reaching out at there's these points at 4 weeks and at 8 weeks where they're getting some feedback about their strengths and weaknesses. To be honest, if everything is going fine, they might not get any comments. If things are C- or below, faculty have to give comments. If things are going fine, they might just say they're fine, so I don't need to give any comments. Your students, though, have the right to, if they're not sure how they're doing, that's really hard to be uncertain, because that's not very motivating. I would encourage them to reach out to their faculty member and say, could we, I didn't get any 8-week comments, or I did get 8-week comments, could we just meet for 20 minutes and talk about what are things I'm doing well in class, what are things that I still need to work on in class. So yeah, I would kind of have them touch base with a faculty member. They could meet with their academic advisor. So academic advisors kind of help students kind of problem solve if there's things that are problems that are happening.
Does every faculty member send comments separately, or is it like one big email?
They're basically, faculty members submit it in the kind of online portal, and then a student will get an email that says, go check your comments on there. So like if I were a student, I would then pull up and it would have all my comments there online, but they would get an email about it. Yeah, sure.
Hi. Some students, some people are really good at coming up with a plan and going for it, and other people might be more hesitant. Maybe they, for whatever reason, don't know what's available to them. How does Reed encourage all the students to maximize their potential here and get the most out of the education that they can?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you're saying that some people may not initiate that. So sort of how do they find out about that? So, there are lots of things out there, and I guess the question is certainly in student life they send out this email every 2 weeks with here's all the social things that are happening on campus. So there's lots of things that are sort of telling them information about that, really trying to maximize that. In some sense, I gave the example of you have to get your PIN to be able to register for classes. So that's going to be a moment when that student kind of structurally is going to need to meet with their academic advisor. So there's a moment where they, I think there's a lot of things. Students get so many. I think we try to give all of this information, and I guess the question is sort of thinking about how do you make sure that they're kind of noticing the key things that they need to have about that.
How they're acting on it, how they're, like, if you notice a student maybe who's doing really well in classes, but not maybe signing up for things, that will help them develop, how do you kind of encourage them to do that, or do you?
Yeah, that's and I think there's probably a number of paths. So I think, first year students who are in HUME 110, they have these paper conferences. Every time they write a paper, the feedback, they meet with their instructor. And I think those meetings are partly about your paper. Here's what you did well and poorly on your paper. They're also, how do you feel about contributing in class? What's going on? So like, again, all of those moments where I think their instructors in their classes, their academic advisor, their first year students are living in the dorms. So they've got resident advisor, someone in their dorm who might be noticing, I have these events, I'm trying to get students involved in that. So I think there's kind of a number of different places where we're kind of trying to help engage students to do these various things. I think that's a good question. I think there are all of these, I have advisees, and I'll feel like they're getting all of this information on emails, and they'll say, oh, I don't ever read my email. And I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of hard if you don't read your email. Like, you kind of need to, I guess I feel like there are all these ways that we're trying to get that information. I don't know that students are always seeing that information because they may not be kind of working on that. But I don't know how much, influence you have with your child. But again, I think there really are all of these things in terms of thinking of them, encouraging them to, many departments, for instance, have, events that happen in their department. So even just all these things, get on that list that tells you about all the stuff that's happening there. And so there may be a little step that they need to take of putting themselves on some listserv or something like that. But then the information is just going to come to them that they'll have the kind of access to these things. But there's some.
In my son's high school, tragically, 2 students committed suicide while he was there, and unfortunately, we are in an era of kids committing suicide. Do you guys have a system for being able to pick up kids in distress?
Yeah, tough, yeah, I would say, really tough situation. Basically, you've got kind of some of the similar things. I think, who are the kind of frontline folks that are sort of seeing these things? And so a faculty member, and again, if there's a student in distress, it could take a lot of different forms, obviously. So sometimes distress is you stop showing up, so you're not. So if I'm a faculty member and a student stopped attending, I reach out to the care team. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're not showing up. But that to me is a red flag. They haven't been in class. So I need to kind of reach out and find out what's going on there. So then there's someone who literally will be in touch with them and will show up in their dorm and knock on their door and interact with them if there's something where we haven't seen this person, we want to make sure that we see this person. So faculty often will see that in the classroom. There's also folks, again, like I was saying, folks in the dorm or those kinds of things where they're sort of seeing, so again, distress could be not being there. Distress could be the student isn't turning in things, or when they come to class, I sometimes will have a student that will come and sleep through class. That's just that's not personal to me. Again, maybe I'm really boring or whatever, but that's not, but it's also, what's going on? Are they, so I'll say, let's talk. Something's going on that you're sleeping in class. Oh, I'm having really some sleep disorder. So there can be some so distress can take lots of forms, but I think basically there's folks that are seeing people a lot and they're noticing when there's changes in that behavior. And then I think the role of many people, as a faculty member, the role isn't that I'm not a clinician. My role is to make sure that I get them to the resources that they need. So if I'm talking with a student, and again, the student is thriving and doing great now, but I had a student who came by and said some things that were really distressing, and I said, we're going to walk across campus and go to the health center. So we just walked over to the health center, and they checked in and had an appointment with somebody right then, because I was concerned things that they were saying in my office. Again, that's a rare event that happens, and again, they were then fine. Again, we're fine, but again, I was like, I can cancel whatever I have to do next. Here's a student that I need to make sure that they get to somebody who really is trained to help them with these things, because that's, faculty are not trained to do that. They're trained to notice signs and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about, you just mentioned training. What does it mean? Like it's a training for all the faculty. What does it mean? Training?
Yeah, so the question is kind of thinking about training, and then there's some other question up there. Basically, faculty are getting training about advising, getting training about, or even ways, some ways to kind of support students. And again, this idea, and I don't want to say the training is not that they're clinicians, that they sort of, those kinds of things, but they're just like, what do you do if a student hasn't been coming to class? What do you do if it's kind of some training about, here are the resources. So faculty have those lists of resources that they then turn to make sure that students are getting the support that they need. So we are kind of at closing up on time, so I know some people want to go, but I'm here all day. So anyway, I can, I'm happy to keep answering questions. So, but.
So I really appreciate.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Anyway, thank you. So if you need to go to the next thing, but I'm happy to keep answering questions too. Yeah.
So Reed's bucking the trends of participating in the rankings and focusing on academics. So my question is, I appreciated the feet to the fire comment about the thesis being essentially project management. Is that overtly stated to the students, and is there a framework where the concept of academia, and because the other thing that everyone knows about Reed College is that so many students go on to graduate study, and the world of academia is its own topic. And is that ever systematically or overtly addressed with the students so that they have an understanding of what they would do to survive in that? How do they learn that they're getting that skill and to be aware of it?
Yeah, that's a great, yeah, I mean, it's almost like what's the narrative and the framing about what we're doing here so that students kind of understand that. Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of, I mean, it's interesting, I was talking with someone in Center for Life Beyond Reed, and they said sometimes students don't always know, like even on a student's resume, they might not list that they did a senior thesis. A senior thesis is they've done a lot of work to be able to do that project. And I think not many people haven't done something like that. And they might not, again, some of them will go on and become academics. I have a number of students that are professors at other places and so forth. But really kind of thinking about that. So I think that we really want to, and I don't know that we always do the best job about that, but really kind of messaging, like helping them understand what are they developing and doing all of these kinds of things. Because I think the messaging they may hear out in the world is sort of, you need these kind of really practical skills, but something like being able to think critically and to know how to run the stats for your thesis and do it. I mean, I think these are really practical, important skills to be able to do lots of things in that. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but yeah, I think making sure that they understand kind of the things that they've been able to accomplish and do to be able to do that work.